It was just another ordinary morning at one of the most upscale cafes in town. The sun was shining, the smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, and the patrons were enjoying their morning lattes. But then something unexpected happened. A woman dressed simply in jeans and a plain shirt walked in, completely out of place in the sea of well-dressed customers. She was greeted with cold stares, whispers, and then, without warning, the manager approached her with a stern look. "You need to leave," he said sharply, pointing to the door. "This is a luxury cafe. You don't belong here." Confused and embarrassed, the woman was escorted out. As she stood outside, the other customers went back to their conversations, blissfully unaware of what had just unfolded. But what they didn't know was that the woman they had just rejected was no ordinary person. In fact, she was about to change the entire course of their day and their lives forever. As it turns out, this woman wasn't just another face in the crowd. She wasn't just someone who happened to wander in off the street. She owned the very building they were sitting in, along with the entire block. A simple woman, dismissed by the very people who thought they were above her, had the power to make their lives a lot more interesting, and possibly a whole lot more uncomfortable. So, what happens when they find out? Stay tuned to see how this simple woman's quiet return turns into a powerful lesson they'll never forget. As the woman walked away from the cafe, her mind raced. She hadn't expected to be treated this way, especially not in a place she knew so well. This wasn't the first time she'd come in for a quiet coffee. In fact, she'd been here countless times before, just like everyone else. But today was different. Today, they saw only what she looked like on the outside and judged her for it. Her name was Clare, but to most people, she was just another face in the crowd. A middle-aged woman, quiet and humble, with no hint of the fortune that lay beneath the surface. But Clare wasn't just any woman. Behind her modest appearance, she was the owner of one of the largest real estate empires in the city, an empire that stretched far beyond the very block that the cafe sat on. Yet, she never felt the need to flaunt her wealth. She preferred the simplicity of anonymity, choosing to keep a low profile, far away from the world of luxury and high society that so many of her peers reveled in. As Claire stood on the sidewalk, she could see through the glass windows of the cafe. The manager was speaking with some of the other staff, likely explaining why he had thrown her out. She knew what they were probably saying, how they didn't want people like her ruining the vibe of their exclusive cafe. But little did they know, Claire was the one who could decide whether their cafe would even remain open. She turned and walked away slowly, her eyes narrowed in quiet determination. She wasn't just going to let this slide. This wasn't about the coffee or the insult, it was about something much bigger. The question on her mind was clear. How would they react when they realized who she really was? As Claire walked away, she could feel her heart pounding in her chest. The sting of embarrassment still lingered, but it wasn't the public rejection that bothered her. No, it was the principle of it all, the sheer audacity of someone, especially in a place she helped create, to assume they were better than her simply because of how she dressed. It wasn't just a slight against her. It was a slight against everyone who had ever been underestimated because of their appearance. Meanwhile, inside the cafe, the atmosphere had shifted. The staff, still buzzing with the incident, exchanged glances, unsure of what to make of what had just happened. Mark, the cafe manager, stood by the counter, his brow furrowed with confusion. He was a young man, recently promoted, and eager to prove himself. In his mind, he had only done what was necessary to protect the cafe's reputation. The thought of letting someone who didn't fit in disrupt the carefully crafted environment was intolerable. But now, as he replayed the event in his head, doubt crept in. He wondered if he had acted too hastily. A few of the other customers had also taken note of the incident, but for different reasons. Some whispered to each other about the woman's sudden departure, while others shrugged it off, dismissing her as just another regular who didn't belong. Yet, something about her seemed familiar. One of the cafe's regulars, Peter, a lawyer who spent his mornings here, had a nagging feeling he had seen Claire before. It wasn't just her face, it was the way she carried herself, the quiet confidence that no one seemed to notice. Outside, Claire wasn't done yet. She had always kept a low profile, but this was the moment when everything could change. Her empire, her power, none of it had ever been a weapon before, but now she was about to turn the tables in a way no one saw coming. And Mark, the manager, would soon find out the hard way that he had just crossed the wrong person. The following day, Claire returned to the café, but this time she wasn't walking in casually, blending into the crowd. This time she had a purpose, a quiet resolve that only she could fully understand. She stood across the street for a moment, watching the café through the glass, feeling the tension building in her chest. Every part of her wanted to just leave, to walk away and never look back, but she couldn't shake the thought of what happened yesterday. No one, especially not someone like Mark, could get away with treating her that way. Not when they had no idea who they were dealing with. Inside, the café was bustling as usual. Mark was standing at the counter again, greeting customers with that overly practiced smile, but it faltered as his eyes drifted toward the door. Something told him today was different. A sense of unease crawled up his spine. The door swung open, and Claire walked in, her footsteps calm but deliberate. The entire café seemed to fall into a hush as she crossed the room. Mark's heart skipped a beat. His mind raced, wondering if she was here to confront him, to demand an apology. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could say anything, Claire stood at the center of the café, eyes locked onto his. The moment felt like it was frozen in time, the energy in the room crackling. Mark hesitated, not sure whether he should try to explain himself or avoid confrontation altogether. But Claire wasn't here for an apology. She wasn't here to ask for anything. Instead, she looked around, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the sleek, modern design of the café, the faces of the well-dressed customers who hadn't thought twice about dismissing her the day before. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she spoke, her words heavy with unspoken power. "You've made a mistake." Mark froze. The air seemed to thicken, and every pair of eyes in the café turned toward Claire, wondering what she would do next. What was her next move? The tension was unbearable. As Claire's words hung in the air, a strange silence spread across the café. Mark stood frozen, his mind scrambling for a way to regain control of the situation. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. His eyes darted nervously from Claire to the staff and back again, sensing the shift in the room. Everyone had stopped what they were doing, and for the first time, the café felt uncomfortable, like a house of cards on the verge of toppling. But Claire wasn't done yet. She took a slow step forward, her gaze never leaving Mark's. She was calm, too calm, and that unnerving tranquility made him feel even more uneasy. Then, just as he thought she was about to explain herself or demand an apology, she dropped the bombshell. "I'm the owner of this building," Claire said, her voice a little louder now, drawing the attention of everyone around. "The block you're sitting on, the land you think you own, it's mine, every last inch of it." The shock in the café was palpable. Mark's face drained of color as the realization hit him. He had no idea who he was dealing with, but now it was all becoming painfully clear. The high-end café, the exclusive vibe, it all meant nothing when you found out who truly held the power. But Claire wasn't just here to reveal her ownership. She had come for something more. Just as Mark opened his mouth to apologize, a second twist came crushing down. A well-dressed man in his 50s, someone Claire recognized from the building management company, walked in behind her, holding a set of legal papers. Without a word, he handed them to Mark. The papers were simple but shocking. A notice of eviction. Claire wasn't just a silent owner. She had decided it was time to take action, and this café was the first casualty of her plan. Mark's eyes widened as he read the document, and a cold sweat broke out on his forehead. What had he just gotten himself into? The room was silent as Mark slowly scanned the eviction notice, his hands trembling. His eyes darted between the document and Claire, who stood there, watching him intently. Every word on that paper felt like a punch in the gut. He had underestimated her completely. His mind raced as he tried to form an explanation, to somehow make the situation right, but nothing came out. The reality was too overwhelming. Claire was in control now. The café, the land, the block, it was all hers. But the look in her eyes was not one of vengeance. No, there was something far more calculated beneath that calm exterior. She wasn't just here to reclaim what was hers. She was making a statement. You thought you could throw me out, but I'm the one who gets to decide what stays and what goes, Claire said, her voice steady. And this café is no longer part of the plan. Mark swallowed hard, trying to gather his thoughts, but it was clear he had lost all leverage. His reputation, his job, everything he had worked for in this café was now on the line. The staff stood frozen, unsure whether to speak or flee. But just as Mark was about to speak, to beg for forgiveness, there was a sudden burst of laughter from the back of the room. It was Peter, the lawyer, who had been sitting quietly earlier. He stood up, his expression wide with amusement. Is this really happening? Peter chuckled. You thought you could throw someone out like that, without knowing who they were. Everyone turned to Peter, confused. He flashed a grin at Mark, then turned to Clare. You've just made a very interesting enemy, my friend. Claire raised an eyebrow, a smirk playing on her lips. Not quite, Peter, she replied, her tone suddenly lighter. You see, the funny thing is, I already own the law firm where Peter works. He's my lawyer. The shock hit everyone like a tidal wave. Peter, the one person who had always seemed like an outsider, was now revealed as one of Claire's most trusted allies. In an instant, Mark realized that the café's fate had been sealed before he even knew who Clare was. But the twist didn't stop there. By the way, Claire added casually, you might want to check the papers again. That eviction notice? It's not for the café. It's for you, Mark. The room erupted in shocked murmurs as Mark's world came crashing down. Claire had not just claimed her space, she had outsmarted him at every turn. Mark's face turned an ashen color as the reality of Claire's words sank in. The eviction notice for him. His heart pounded in his chest as he realized that his job, his position, everything he thought he controlled, had been stripped away in an instant. He tried to speak, to explain, but the words wouldn't come. The room was spinning, and all he could hear was the sound of his own breathing. Claire stood there calm as ever, watching Mark unravel. She hadn't wanted to go this far, but after the way he treated her, after the way he had dismissed her, she knew it was the only way to make her point. Her empire was built on more than just wealth. It was built on respect, humility, and the understanding that appearances could be deceiving. She had been underestimated, and she was done letting people take advantage of her. As the staff quietly packed their things and left the café, Peter came up beside Claire. You've made your move. I think the rest of them will learn to respect you now. Claire nodded, but her thoughts were elsewhere. The café would be restructured, and its new management would focus on creating a space where everyone, regardless of their background, felt welcome. But that was only the beginning. There were bigger changes on the horizon, changes that would reshape the entire neighborhood. Claire's quiet strength had been tested, but now she was ready to take her place in the world, not just as an owner, but as a force to be reckoned with. As Claire stepped out into the sunlight, she felt the weight of the moment lift off her shoulders. She had proven that people like her, no matter how simple or humble they appeared, were capable of making waves. And in the end, it was her quiet confidence and determination that had turned the tables, leaving a lasting message for anyone who ever doubted her again. And so the story ended, not with a loud bang, but with a quiet victory. The block, the café, and the people who thought they were untouchable, none of them would ever be the same again. Claire had shown them all what it truly meant to underestimate someone.